The Delta Force begins with the kind of tension that immediately tells us this is not going to be an ordinary military action movie. Because from its opening moments, the story places us in a world where terrorism, international politics, military discipline, and the lives of innocent passengers are all connected. And at the center of this dangerous situation is Major Scott McCoy, a highly trained American Special Forces officer whose experience has taught him that the battlefield is never as simple as it appears. Because behind every mission, there are human lives, difficult decisions, and consequences that can continue long after the shooting stops. The movie, directed by Menahem Golan and starring Chuck Norris and Lee Marvin, takes inspiration from real-world terrorist incidents and especially the 1985 hijacking of TWA Flight 847, transforming those events into a fictionalized action story about an American military unit known as the Delta Force, a specialized group of soldiers trained to deal with the kind of hostage crisis that conventional forces cannot handle. What makes the opening especially effective is that the film does not immediately rush into non-stop action. Instead, it establishes the military world, the personalities of the soldiers, and the seriousness of the threats they are preparing to face. Major McCoy is introduced as a man who understands responsibility. He is not simply a soldier who enjoys fighting. He is a professional who has spent years learning how to operate under pressure, and his greatest strength is his ability to remain focused when everyone else is losing control. McCoy's military experience has made him cautious, but it has also made him extremely confident in his abilities. He knows what he can do, and he understands the risks involved in special operations. His commanding officers know that when a mission becomes too dangerous for ordinary troops, McCoy is one of the men they can rely on. But the movie also shows that McCoy is not invulnerable emotionally. Behind the uniform is a man who understands the value of life and knows that every mission can cost someone dearly. This becomes important because the Delta Force is ultimately not just about soldiers fighting terrorists. It is about the responsibility of rescuing people who have no ability to protect themselves. The story begins in a military environment where McCoy and his fellow soldiers are preparing for a mission, and the audience gets a glimpse into the discipline and training required to become part of an elite counterterrorism unit. These men are not ordinary infantry soldiers. They are trained to move quickly, operate with limited information, and make life or death decisions within seconds. Their weapons, communication systems, tactics, and teamwork are designed for situations where a single mistake can cost many lives. The movie uses this preparation to establish the contrast between the professional military world and the unpredictable world of terrorism. A soldier can train for years, but no amount of preparation can guarantee that a hostile situation will unfold according to plan. A terrorist may change demands, move passengers, threaten civilians, or deliberately create confusion. That uncertainty is what makes hostage rescue so dangerous. The Delta Force soldiers understand this, and their training emphasizes patience as much as aggression. McCoy, in particular, understands that rushing into a hostile situation without a clear plan could make things worse. He has seen the consequences of poorly planned military operations, and this experience has shaped his approach. At the same time, the movie introduces Colonel Nick Alexander, played by Lee Marvin, who serves as the senior commander and represents the calm authority of the Delta Force. Alexander is experienced, disciplined, and capable of making difficult decisions without allowing emotion to interfere with his judgment. Where McCoy represents the operational side of the mission, Alexander represents command and strategy. The relationship is based on mutual respect. Alexander knows that McCoy is one of the best soldiers under his command, while McCoy understands that Alexander has the authority and experience to determine when and how the unit should be deployed. Together, they represent the military structure that will eventually respond when the terrorist crisis becomes too dangerous for ordinary authorities. The film's early scenes are important because they establish the soldiers as professionals before the major crisis begins. Instead of presenting them as unstoppable superheroes, the movie shows that they are trained men who understand that even elite soldiers can be overwhelmed by circumstances. Their weapons may be advanced, their tactics may be sophisticated, and their physical abilities may be exceptional, but they are still dealing with an enemy that can hide among civilians and exploit the limitations of governments. This is one of the central ideas of the movie. Terrorism does not require an army. A small group of determined individuals can create an international crisis simply by taking control of an aircraft filled with civilians. That is why the Delta Force exists. Their job is not to win a conventional war. Their job is to enter situations where there are no easy choices. As the story develops, the focus shifts from the military training environment toward the commercial flight that will become the center of the crisis. The aircraft is carrying ordinary passengers, including families, business travelers, tourists, and people simply trying to reach their destination. These passengers have no idea that their journey is about to become a nightmare. The movie spends time showing the normality of air travel because this makes the coming crisis more shocking. People board the aircraft with luggage, take their seats, talk with fellow passengers, and prepare for the flight as they would on any ordinary day. Some passengers are traveling for personal reasons, while others are traveling for business. There are also members of the crew who are simply doing their jobs. Nobody expects that armed men will soon take control of the aircraft. This ordinary beginning is important because terrorism often depends on surprise. The passengers do not know what is coming, and neither does the public watching from outside. The terrorists, however, have planned the operation carefully. They have selected the aircraft because it gives them leverage. Once the plane is in the air, the passengers become hostages, and the terrorists can use their lives to pressure governments. This is what makes aircraft hijacking such a powerful terrorist tactic. A plane is essentially a confined environment thousands of feet above the ground. Passengers cannot escape, police cannot simply enter, and the crew must follow instructions to prevent innocent people from being killed. The terrorists therefore gain control not only of the aircraft but also of the political situation surrounding it. As the plane continues its journey, the terrorists reveal themselves. Armed men suddenly take control of the aircraft, creating immediate panic among the passengers. The transition from normal travel to terror happens quickly, and the passengers are forced to understand that their lives are now controlled by strangers with weapons. The hijackers are not interested in negotiating as equals. They want to establish absolute authority. They threaten the passengers and crew, and the atmosphere inside the aircraft becomes one of fear and uncertainty. People are forced to remain calm while knowing that any sudden movement could provoke violence. The terrorists have carefully chosen their moment, and their success depends on maintaining fear. The passengers begin realizing that their safety depends on the decisions of people they have never met. Among the passengers are individuals whose personal stories later become important to the emotional side of the movie. One of the most significant figures is a member of the crew who is forced to deal directly with the terrorists while trying to protect the passengers. The flight crew becomes trapped between their responsibility to the passengers and the demands of the hijackers. They must follow instructions while also attempting to prevent panic. This creates an impossible situation because the crew cannot fight heavily armed terrorists without risking the lives of everyone on board. The passengers are similarly powerless. Even if some of them are physically strong or brave, the confined environment of the aircraft makes resistance extremely dangerous. The terrorists understand this advantage and use it to maintain control. Outside the aircraft, authorities begin learning about the hijacking, and the situation quickly becomes an international crisis. News of the incident spreads, Governments begin monitoring the aircraft, and officials attempt to determine what the terrorists want. This is where the movie begins expanding beyond the plane itself. The hijacking is no longer simply a criminal incident, it becomes a political crisis involving multiple countries, intelligence agencies, military forces, and international negotiations. The terrorists know that their strongest weapon is not necessarily their firearms, their strongest weapon is the hostages. As long as innocent passengers remain in their control, governments must consider every decision carefully. A military assault could kill the hostages. A negotiation could give the terrorists more time. Doing nothing could allow the situation to continue indefinitely. This is the terrible balance that governments face during a hostage crisis. The terrorists issue demands and authorities begin evaluating their options. Meanwhile, the passengers remain trapped inside the aircraft, unsure whether they will survive. The movie uses these moments to build suspense because the audience knows that the Delta Force is eventually going to become involved. Nandarmadi. But the soldiers cannot simply appear immediately. There must first be a crisis serious enough to justify the deployment of an elite military unit. McCoy and Alexander are therefore initially separated from the direct action, waiting for orders while intelligence develops. This waiting period is important because it emphasizes the frustration of soldiers who know they may be able to help but cannot act until the political and military leadership authorizes them. McCoy is ready for action, but he understands that acting without orders could create an even greater disaster. His discipline prevents him from simply taking matters into his own hands. The terrorists, meanwhile, begin demonstrating that they are willing to use violence to prove their seriousness. Their threats are not empty. They understand that governments may hesitate to believe them, so they create situations that force authorities to take their demands seriously. Every threat increases the pressure on officials. Every passenger becomes a potential bargaining chip. The terrorists also begin separating certain passengers from the larger group, creating additional fear and uncertainty. The hijacking becomes more than a simple demand for money or transportation. The terrorists have political objectives, and they want the world to see their cause. The plane becomes a stage for their message. The passengers become unwilling participants in a political spectacle. This is one of the darker themes of the Delta Force. Innocent people can become targets simply because they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The film repeatedly emphasizes that the passengers are ordinary people. They are not soldiers. They are not politicians. They are not responsible for the conflicts that created the terrorist ideology. Yet they are the ones paying the price. This makes the eventual mission of the Delta Force morally straightforward. The soldiers are not simply going after enemies. They are trying to rescue people who cannot rescue themselves. As the authorities analyze the situation, military planners begin considering possible responses. The Delta Force is placed on alert. McCoy and his fellow operators know that if the order comes, they may have to move quickly. Their training begins to shift from routine preparation toward a real counterterrorism operation. Equipment is checked, weapons are prepared, communication systems are reviewed, and intelligence is gathered. Every detail matters because once the operation begins, there may be no opportunity to correct mistakes. The soldiers understand that a hostage rescue mission could require them to fight inside a crowded environment where civilians are standing only a few feet away. Accuracy will be more important than firepower. Timing will be more important than speed. Surprise will be more important than numbers. McCoy understands this better than anyone. He knows that an elite unit is valuable not because it can destroy everything in its path, but because it can accomplish a difficult objective while minimizing civilian casualties. This philosophy shapes the way he approaches the coming crisis. While the military prepares, the passengers continue enduring the psychological pressure of captivity. The terrorists control their movements, restrict communication, and create an atmosphere where nobody knows what will happen next. Some passengers try to remain calm by talking quietly to each other. Others pray. Some become angry. Others simply stare ahead in silence. The movie uses these human reactions to remind us that terrorism is not only about physical violence, fear itself becomes a weapon. A terrorist does not need to shoot every hostage. The possibility that they might shoot someone can be enough to control an entire group. The passengers are therefore living under constant psychological pressure. Every command from the hijackers carries the possibility of death. Every unexpected movement creates fear. Every announcement from the cockpit can change the situation. The crew attempts to maintain professionalism, but even they know how dangerous the situation is. The captain and other crew members must make difficult decisions while trying to protect the people in their care. They cannot simply overpower the terrorists, but they can sometimes delay, communicate, or create small opportunities for survival. Their courage is quieter than the military action that comes later, but it is equally important. Outside the aircraft, the international response becomes increasingly complicated. Because the hijacking involves an aircraft crossing national borders, multiple governments become involved. Questions arise about where the plane should land, who has jurisdiction, and whether authorities will permit a military rescue. Every decision has political consequences. If a government uses force and hostages die, it may face international criticism. If it refuses to act, it may be accused of weakness. The terrorists understand this political pressure and use it to their advantage. They attempt to manipulate governments into making concessions. The crisis therefore becomes a battle of patience and willpower. The terrorists want authorities to believe that they control the situation. The authorities want to create the impression that they are not being pressured. Meanwhile, the Delta Force waits. McCoy is especially frustrated because he knows that time can work against the hostages. The longer terrorists control an aircraft, the more opportunities they have to move passengers, change locations, or strengthen their position. A rescue operation becomes more difficult with every passing hour. McCoy's experience tells him that eventually the terrorists may make a mistake, but he also knows that innocent people may die before that happens. His desire to act must therefore be balanced by military discipline. This internal conflict gives his character more depth. He is not eager to kill, he is eager to save. The difference is important. McCoy understands that every bullet fired during a hostage rescue has the potential to hit an innocent person. The objective is therefore not simply to defeat the terrorists, it is to defeat them without losing the people they are holding. This becomes the defining challenge of the Delta Force mission. Colonel Alexander takes responsibility for preparing the unit. He knows that McCoy is capable of leading men under pressure, but he also knows that the mission will require more than individual courage. It will require intelligence, timing, coordination, and absolute discipline. The soldiers are briefed on the situation and the seriousness of the crisis becomes clear. They are not preparing for a conventional battle. They are preparing to enter an environment where civilians and terrorists are mixed together, where the enemy may use hostages as shields, and where the location may change without warning. Their training has prepared them for exactly this kind of mission, but preparation cannot eliminate uncertainty. The Delta Force soldiers understand that once they are deployed, they may not know what they will encounter until the moment they arrive. McCoy studies the available information carefully. He wants to know the aircraft's layout, the number of terrorists, their weapons, the condition of the passengers, and any possible weaknesses in the hijackers' security. Intelligence is incomplete, but every piece of information can save a life. He also studies the personalities of the terrorists. Understanding how they think may be just as important as understanding how they are armed. A terrorist who is calm may respond differently from one who is desperate. A leader may behave differently from a follower. A hostage taker who believes he has nothing to lose may be more dangerous than someone seeking negotiation. McCoy understands that the psychological side of the operation will matter. The military cannot simply storm the plane without considering how the terrorists might react. The crisis continues to evolve, and the plane's movement becomes increasingly important. The hijackers use the aircraft's mobility to remain unpredictable. They can demand fuel, change destinations, and force governments to respond. This constant movement makes it difficult for authorities to establish a rescue operation. A military team needs a predictable location to prepare an assault. but the terrorists can change that location at any time. Every new destination creates a new set of risks. The passengers become exhausted as the ordeal continues. They are separated from their normal lives and forced to live under constant uncertainty. Some may not even know what is happening outside. They cannot see the military preparations or political negotiations. All they know is what they can hear and observe inside the aircraft. This limited information makes fear worse. Humans naturally imagine the worst when they lack information, and the terrorists benefit from that uncertainty. Their control is partly physical and partly psychological. As the crisis develops, McCoy becomes increasingly aware that this will not be solved through negotiation alone. The terrorists are prepared to use violence, and the military may eventually have to intervene. This realization creates the foundation for the action that will define the later parts of the movie. But before the Delta Force can launch its mission, the story needs to establish exactly what is at stake. The passengers are not numbers. Each one represents a life that can be destroyed by a single mistake. This is why the film spends so much time inside the aircraft. It wants the audience to understand that the military mission is not about defeating an abstract enemy. It is about bringing ordinary people home. McCoy's motivation becomes increasingly personal as he thinks about the families waiting for those passengers. He understands that every hostage has someone who cares about them. Every person on the plane represents a family, a relationship, a future, and a life outside the crisis. This human perspective prevents the movie from becoming only a military spectacle. The Delta Force soldiers may be heavily armed and highly trained, but their ultimate mission is deeply human. They are there because someone has to go into danger when innocent people cannot escape it themselves. As the first major phase of the story reaches its conclusion, the situation becomes more urgent. The terrorists continue controlling the aircraft, the passengers remain trapped, and governments struggle to find a solution that does not result in mass casualties. McCoy and Alexander know that the moment may come when diplomacy is no longer enough. The Delta Force is ready. Their equipment is prepared, their weapons are checked, their intelligence is being reviewed, and their soldiers understand that the next order could send them directly into one of the most dangerous missions of their careers. McCoy stands ready because this is the kind of situation he was trained for. He knows there is no guarantee of success, but he also knows that doing nothing could be even more dangerous. The terrorists believe they have control because they possess the hostages, but they have made one critical mistake. They have attracted the attention of the one military unit specifically trained to deal with situations like this. The passengers are still trapped, the terrorists are still armed, and the international crisis is still unfolding. But somewhere in the background, the Delta Force is preparing to move. Major Scott McCoy understands that when the order finally comes, there will be no room for hesitation. He will have to lead his men into a situation where every second matters and where one wrong decision could mean the death of innocent people. The mission has not officially begun yet, but the countdown has already started. The terrorists have taken control of the aircraft, but they have not yet realized that the balance of power is about to change. Behind the scenes, American Special Forces are preparing for a confrontation that will take them far beyond the normal battlefield into an operation where courage, precision, discipline, and sacrifice will determine whether the hostages return home alive. And as the story moves forward, McCoy will discover that rescuing the passengers will require more than simply finding the aircraft. He will have to face terrorists who are prepared to kill, political complications that can delay military action, and an enemy who knows that the hostages are its greatest protection. The Delta Force is ready, but the most dangerous part of the mission is still ahead. The situation surrounding the hijacked aircraft becomes even more dangerous as the terrorists tighten their control over the passengers and governments struggle to determine how far they are willing to go to secure their demands. while Major Scott McCoy and Colonel Nick Alexander remain on standby, knowing that their unit may soon be ordered into an operation where a single mistake could cost dozens of innocent lives. Inside the aircraft, the passengers are beginning to understand that this is not a short interruption to their journey but a full scale hostage crisis, and the uncertainty is becoming almost as frightening as the terrorists themselves. They do not know where they will be taken, whether they will be released, or whether the people holding them intend to kill them. The terrorists use this uncertainty deliberately, maintaining control through intimidation and making it clear that resistance will have consequences. Among the passengers, fear takes different forms. Some people attempt to remain calm, some quietly encourage others, while others struggle to understand why they have suddenly become part of an international political crisis. The crew members are under enormous pressure because they must continue performing their responsibilities while knowing that armed men are controlling the aircraft. Every announcement, every movement, and every decision must be carefully considered. Meanwhile, outside the aircraft, American officials and military planners are gathering intelligence and trying to determine the safest possible response. The problem is that a hostage rescue operation becomes much harder when the terrorists control the location and can move the hostages whenever they want. McCoy understands that the military cannot simply rush in. The Delta Force needs information about the aircraft, the terrorists, their weapons, their numbers, and their intentions. The more information the soldiers have, the better their chances of protecting the hostages. Yet, the terrorists are constantly changing the situation, making reliable intelligence difficult to obtain. This creates frustration among the military planners because they know that time is not necessarily on their side. The longer the hostages remain under terrorist control, the more exhausted and psychologically vulnerable they become. At the same time, the terrorists gain confidence from the fact that governments are hesitant to use force. Their greatest advantage is therefore not just their weapons, but the fear of what might happen if those weapons are used against them. McCoy recognizes this immediately. He knows that the terrorists are relying on the hostages as human shields, and that any rescue attempt must be carefully designed to separate the terrorists from the civilians. Colonel Alexander approaches the situation with the calm discipline expected from a senior commander. He does not allow emotion to dictate military decisions, even though everyone involved understands the human cost of failure. Alexander knows that McCoy is one of the best men available for the mission, but he also knows that sending an elite team into an uncertain hostage situation can have catastrophic consequences. The Delta Force must therefore prepare for several possible scenarios. They may have to board an aircraft, secure a terminal, pursue terrorists after a landing, or protect hostages during a chaotic evacuation. The soldiers train and rehearse possible situations, but no rehearsal can perfectly reproduce the confusion of a real terrorist attack. McCoy repeatedly emphasizes the importance of speed and precision. The soldiers must be fast enough to surprise the terrorists, but controlled enough to avoid harming civilians. Their weapons must be ready, their communications must work, and every member of the team must understand his responsibility. Unlike a conventional battlefield, there is no clear front line. The enemy may be standing only a few feet away from an innocent passenger. That makes the mission one of the most demanding types of military operation imaginable. While the Delta Force prepares, the terrorists continue their political strategy. They know that governments are watching every move, and they use the passengers to create international pressure. Their demands are designed to force authorities into difficult choices. If governments refuse, the terrorists can threaten the hostages. If governments cooperate, they risk appearing weak and encouraging future attacks. The situation becomes a test of political will as much as military ability. McCoy, however, is focused on a simpler question. How can the hostages be brought home alive? He has little interest in political speeches or ideological arguments. To him, the people trapped on the aircraft are civilians who need help. This straightforward sense of duty becomes one of his defining characteristics. He is willing to take enormous personal risks, but he wants those risks to serve a purpose. As the crisis develops, the passengers are moved and controlled according to the terrorists' demands, creating confusion for the authorities. The aircraft itself becomes a symbol of the terrorists' power because it allows them to transport the hostages beyond the immediate reach of law enforcement. Every time the plane moves, the military has to reconsider its options. The Delta Force cannot simply follow blindly. They need a location where an operation can be conducted with some chance of success. McCoy studies the situation carefully and realizes that the terrorists will eventually have to land. Aircraft cannot remain in the sky indefinitely, and fuel, logistics, and political pressure will eventually force them to make decisions. That creates a potential opportunity. On the ground, the terrorists lose some of their advantages. They can still use hostages as shields, but the military has more options for surrounding the area and controlling movement. McCoy therefore begins thinking several steps ahead. He understands that patience can be as important as aggression. The soldiers wait for the right moment rather than acting simply because they are eager to fight. This patience is what separates the Delta Force from ordinary action heroes. They are professionals, and professionals understand that the best operation is often the one that avoids unnecessary risks. Inside the aircraft, however, the passengers do not have the luxury of waiting comfortably. They are living under constant threat. The terrorists may shout orders, search passengers, and create an atmosphere of fear. Some passengers are singled out because of their nationality, religion, or perceived political importance, and the situation becomes increasingly complicated. The film emphasizes how quickly ordinary people can become victims of political violence. They did not choose the conflict, but they have been placed directly inside it. This human dimension makes the coming rescue mission more meaningful because McCoy and his soldiers are fighting for people they have never met. As intelligence officers gather information, they begin identifying the terrorist organization and its leaders. This allows American officials to understand that the hijacking is part of a broader political struggle rather than an isolated criminal act. The terrorists are motivated by ideology and political demands, which makes negotiation difficult because their goals extend beyond the immediate situation. They want recognition and concessions, while governments want to protect their citizens and prevent future attacks. The conflict therefore becomes a battle between two completely different objectives. The terrorists believe fear gives them power. The military believes discipline and determination can overcome that fear. McCoy represents the second philosophy. He knows that fear is unavoidable, but he refuses to let it control his decisions. His soldiers are trained to function under pressure precisely because panic can destroy an operation. One frightened soldier can make a mistake, and one mistake can expose the entire team. This is why McCoy constantly emphasizes teamwork. Every Delta Force operator has a role, and every role matters. They must trust one another completely. The movie uses these military preparations to build anticipation for the action that will eventually explode across the screen. The audience understands that something major is coming, but the exact form of the operation remains uncertain. McCoy himself cannot know every detail because the terrorists control the situation. He can only prepare his team for possibilities. This uncertainty is what makes the mission so dangerous. Meanwhile, the terrorists begin becoming increasingly confident. They believe the governments involved are too afraid to launch a direct attack because of the hostages. Their confidence can be seen in the way they communicate and control the passengers. They believe they have the advantage, and in many ways they do. They possess weapons, control the aircraft, and have innocent people standing between them and military forces. But their confidence also creates a weakness. They begin believing that the authorities will never risk an assault. This assumption may eventually cause them to underestimate the Delta Force. McCoy is counting on precisely that mistake. He knows that surprise can compensate for numerical disadvantages. If the soldiers can appear where the terrorists do not expect them, even for a few seconds, they may be able to gain control of the situation. The key will be coordination. The Delta Force must move as a single unit, neutralize threats quickly, and protect civilians at every stage. Their training allows them to communicate through hand signals and controlled movements, reducing the need for verbal commands during an assault. Every operator knows how to cover another, how to move through confined spaces, and how to react when plans change. McCoy's leadership becomes particularly important because the team needs someone who can make decisions instantly. There will be no time for lengthy discussions once the operation begins. He must trust his training and his men. Colonel Alexander, meanwhile, has to make the larger strategic decisions. He must determine when the political circumstances allow military action and whether the intelligence is reliable enough to justify the risk. This division between command and field leadership adds realism to the military structure of the story. McCoy may be the man who physically enters the danger zone, but Alexander is responsible for sending him there. Both men understand that once the order is given, the consequences cannot be undone. The preparations continue as the situation reaches a critical point. The terrorists have made their intentions clear, and the possibility of violence is increasing. American officials realize that a peaceful solution may not be possible. The Delta Force therefore moves from standby toward active preparation. Vehicles, aircraft, weapons, and communication equipment are positioned. Soldiers receive final briefings. Maps and photographs are reviewed. Possible entry points are identified. The atmosphere becomes increasingly serious because everyone knows that the next stage could involve real combat. McCoy remains calm, but beneath that calm is a clear understanding of the danger. He knows that elite training does not guarantee survival. He has seen men die before, and he knows that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to continue despite it. This idea becomes central to his character. The passengers, meanwhile, continue waiting and hoping. Some may believe that governments will rescue them, while others may have begun losing faith. They have no way to know how much preparation is happening outside. The terrorists deliberately isolate them from the outside world, making them feel abandoned. This psychological pressure is one of the terrorists' strongest tools. But somewhere beyond their sight, soldiers are preparing to intervene. The contrast between the helpless passengers and the highly trained military operators creates the emotional foundation for the coming action. The passengers cannot fight for themselves, so someone else must fight for them. That someone is the Delta Force. As the crisis continues, the possibility of a rescue operation becomes more realistic. The military planners begin identifying circumstances under which the terrorists might become vulnerable. A landing, a transfer, or a moment of confusion could provide the opening they need. McCoy understands that the perfect opportunity may never come. Instead, the team may have to create its own opportunity. That is one of the most dangerous aspects of special operations. Soldiers rarely get ideal conditions. They must take incomplete information and turn it into a workable plan. McCoy's experience allows him to make decisions quickly, but he also understands that improvisation must remain within the larger mission objective. The objective is always the same: protect the hostages and eliminate the terrorist threat. As the story moves forward, the terrorists' actions become more aggressive and the threat to the passengers becomes more immediate. The authorities can no longer assume that time will solve the problem. A direct military response becomes increasingly likely. McCoy and Alexander prepare their men for the possibility that they will soon be deployed. The soldiers check weapons one final time, review equipment, and prepare themselves mentally. Some of them may joke or talk casually, because that is how experienced soldiers handle tension, but beneath the surface they know what is coming. Once they enter the operation, there may be no second chance. Their training has prepared them for this moment, and now that training must become action. McCoy looks at his team and understands that these men are trusting him with their lives. He also knows that families are trusting the military with the lives of the hostages. That responsibility weighs heavily on him. The Delta Force is not simply an elite military unit. In this situation, it has become the last line of defense between innocent civilians and armed terrorists. The movie gradually shifts from political suspense toward military action as the pieces begin falling into place. The terrorists think they are controlling the game, but the Americans are quietly preparing a response. The passengers remain unaware of the exact details, but the military is getting closer to the moment when it will act. McCoy understands that the terrorists' greatest mistake is believing that fear will stop the military from taking risks. The Delta Force exists precisely because there are situations where ordinary forces cannot respond. Their job is to enter the danger that others cannot. The aircraft crisis has reached the point where that mission may finally be necessary. As the final moments of this section approach, the tension becomes almost unbearable. The terrorists are still armed, the hostages are still trapped, and the governments involved are still negotiating. But behind the scenes, the Delta Force is moving closer to deployment. McCoy has spent this entire period preparing, waiting, and studying the enemy. Now he must prepare for the possibility that preparation will soon end. He knows that when the order comes, his men will not have the luxury of asking whether the mission is safe. They will have to go. They will have to trust their training, trust their commander, and trust one another. The passengers may not know their names, but these soldiers are preparing to risk everything for people they have never met. That is the essence of the Delta Force mission. The terrorists have taken control of an aircraft, but they have not defeated the people determined to rescue those inside. The real battle has not yet begun, but the pieces are finally in position. Major Scott McCoy is ready, Colonel Alexander is ready, and the soldiers of the Delta Force are waiting for the signal. The terrorists believe the hostages give them complete control, but they are about to discover that taking hostages is only the beginning of a much larger confrontation. The next stage will take the soldiers from preparation into action, where their training will be tested against an enemy that has spent the entire crisis believing that nobody will dare to challenge them. The Delta Force is coming, and when it arrives, the terrorists will finally understand that the passengers they have used as their shield are also the reason an elite military force has been sent directly into the heart of the crisis. The hostage crisis has now reached a point where waiting is becoming almost as dangerous as acting, because the terrorists have demonstrated that they are willing to use innocent passengers as bargaining tools, while the governments involved are under enormous pressure to find a solution before the situation turns into a mass casualty disaster. And somewhere behind the political negotiations and international confusion, Major Scott McCoy and Colonel Nick Alexander are preparing the Delta Force for the moment when diplomacy may finally give way to military action. For McCoy, the central question is no longer whether the terrorists can be trusted, because their actions have already answered that question. The real challenge is finding the right moment to strike. A hostage rescue operation is unlike a conventional battle. There is no battlefield separating soldiers from enemies, no clear line showing where the fight begins and ends, and no guarantee that the terrorists will remain in predictable positions. Every hostage is a potential human shield, every corridor can become a killing zone, and every second of hesitation can allow the terrorists to react. McCoy understands all of this, which is why his preparation has been so careful. He studies every piece of intelligence available to him, examines the movements of the hijackers, considers possible escape routes, and thinks about how the terrorists might respond if they realize that a military operation is underway. His men know that they may have to move with incredible speed, but they also understand that speed without discipline could turn a rescue mission into a tragedy. The Delta Force must be precise. They must know when to shoot, when to move, when to wait, and when to protect a civilian instead of pursuing an enemy. This is what makes their mission so difficult. The terrorists only need one successful attack to create chaos, while the soldiers must make dozens of decisions correctly to achieve victory. Colonel Alexander understands that responsibility from the command level. He knows that once the Delta Force is deployed, there may be no opportunity to reverse the operation. Political leaders can negotiate. Officials can change their positions. and diplomats can make new agreements. But once soldiers enter the danger zone, the situation becomes physical and immediate. Alexander therefore refuses to send his men into danger without a reasonable chance of success. Yet, the longer the crisis continues, the fewer options remain. The terrorists are becoming more confident and their demands are placing governments under increasing pressure. Their ability to move the hostages and create new threats means that the authorities cannot simply wait for them to make a mistake. Eventually, someone will have to take control of the situation. That someone will be the Delta Force. Inside the aircraft, the atmosphere becomes increasingly tense. The passengers are exhausted, frightened, and uncertain about their future. Some try to comfort others, while others become silent and withdrawn. The crew members continue performing their duties under impossible conditions. They know that any sudden confrontation could put everyone at risk, so they attempt to maintain a sense of order. Their professionalism becomes a form of resistance. The terrorists want the passengers to feel completely powerless, but the crew's ability to remain calm gives the passengers at least a small sense of stability. This is especially important because psychological survival becomes almost as difficult as physical survival. People need hope, and even small gestures of reassurance can prevent panic from spreading. The terrorists understand that panic can be dangerous, but they also understand that fear gives them control. They therefore maintain a constant atmosphere of uncertainty, reminding the passengers that their lives are in the hands of armed men. Outside the aircraft, intelligence officers are trying to understand exactly who the terrorists are and what they want. Their political motivations are becoming clearer, but understanding the motivation does not make the situation easier. In fact, it may make it more complicated because ideological terrorists may be willing to accept greater risks than criminals motivated by money. A criminal may surrender if offered enough money or a safe escape, but an ideological extremist may believe that dying for the cause is acceptable. This creates a difficult problem for negotiators. They cannot assume that the terrorists will value their own survival more than the political objective. McCoy understands this difference and prepares his men accordingly. They cannot rely on fear to make the terrorists surrender. They must be prepared for resistance. The Delta Force therefore begins shifting into a more active state. Equipment is moved into position, vehicles are prepared, weapons are inspected, and communication channels are established. The soldiers receive detailed briefings about the potential operation. McCoy emphasizes that the hostages are the priority. The terrorists must be stopped, but the rescue cannot become an uncontrolled assault. Every operator must know where the civilians are likely to be and how to protect them. This requires incredible discipline. In a conventional firefight, soldiers may fire toward enemy positions without hesitation. In a hostage situation, that same instinct can be deadly. The enemy may be standing behind a civilian or using a passenger as a shield. The Delta Force must therefore rely on speed, accuracy, and surprise rather than overwhelming firepower. McCoy's leadership becomes essential because he must keep the team focused even when the pressure increases. He knows that fear can spread among soldiers just as easily as it spreads among civilians. His calm behavior gives his men confidence. He does not pretend that the mission is safe. Instead, he acknowledges the danger and reminds them that they have trained for it. That honesty creates trust. The soldiers know McCoy will not send them somewhere he would not go himself. This becomes one of the defining qualities of his leadership. He leads from the front, and his men are willing to follow because they know he understands the risks. As the crisis continues, the terrorists begin making movements that create new complications. The hostages may be separated, transferred, or moved to different locations, forcing the military to constantly update its plans. This is one of the reasons the situation becomes so difficult. A rescue plan created in the morning may become useless by the afternoon. McCoy has to prepare for multiple possibilities at once. The Delta Force soldiers are trained to adapt, and their ability to improvise becomes increasingly important. The film begins emphasizing that special operations are not simply about physical strength. Intelligence, adaptability, and teamwork matter just as much. A soldier who can shoot accurately but cannot think under pressure is dangerous to his own team. McCoy needs men who can make decisions when the plan collapses. That is exactly what the Delta Force has been trained to do. Meanwhile, the political pressure surrounding the crisis continues growing. News organizations report on the hijacking, and the public becomes increasingly aware that American citizens are among the hostages. Families begin waiting for information, watching television reports, and hoping for signs that their loved ones are safe. The emotional pressure on the government becomes enormous. Every new development can cause public fear, anger, or demands for action. Political leaders understand that they cannot simply ignore the crisis. At the same time, they know that a failed rescue could create an even greater tragedy. This tension between public pressure and military caution becomes one of the most important elements of the story. The Delta Force is ready to act, but the decision to use them must come from higher levels of authority. McCoy cannot simply launch the mission because he believes it is necessary. He must wait for the order. This waiting becomes increasingly frustrating because every hour could bring another threat to the hostages. Yet, McCoy remains disciplined. He understands that acting without authorization could create chaos and potentially make the situation worse. His patience demonstrates another side of his character. He may be an action hero, but he is also a professional soldier who respects command structure. As the terrorists continue their operation, they begin to reveal more of their personalities. Some are aggressive and unpredictable, while others appear more controlled and strategic. This difference is important because terrorist organizations are rarely made up of identical individuals. Each member has different motivations, fears, and levels of commitment. McCoy's intelligence team studies these differences because they may become useful during the rescue. If one terrorist becomes isolated or loses confidence, that could create an opening. If another becomes desperate, he may become more dangerous. Understanding these personalities is part of the psychological battlefield. The Delta Force cannot simply defeat the terrorists physically. They must also understand how the enemy might react. The passengers, meanwhile, begin forming their own small communities inside the aircraft. People who were strangers before the flight now share the same fear. They encourage one another, exchange information, and attempt to remain calm. Some passengers become leaders within the group, helping children and vulnerable people cope with the situation. These moments remind the audience that courage does not always involve weapons. Sometimes courage means remaining calm when you are terrified. Sometimes it means helping someone else even when you are afraid yourself. The movie's military action is built on this human foundation. The Delta Force soldiers are fighting because people like these passengers need someone to fight for them. McCoy understands this responsibility. He does not know the passengers personally, but he knows that each one deserves the chance to return home. That belief becomes a powerful source of motivation. As the situation approaches a breaking point, the military begins preparing for deployment more seriously. The Delta Force moves closer to the operational area, and the soldiers are given increasingly detailed information. McCoy checks his weapons and equipment, but he also studies the environment. He wants to know the physical layout of the locations involved, the possible escape routes, and the areas where terrorists could hide. He understands that the environment can be as dangerous as the enemy. Narrow corridors, crowded rooms, vehicles, and aircraft interiors all create opportunities for ambushes. The soldiers must therefore be prepared to fight in extremely confined spaces. Their training includes rapid movement, coordinated entry, and close quarters combat. The audience begins to see how different this mission is from conventional warfare. There will be no tanks rolling across an open battlefield. There will be no large formations of infantry. Instead, a small number of highly trained soldiers will enter a complex environment and attempt to neutralize an enemy before the hostages are harmed. That requires extraordinary precision. McCoy and Alexander understand that the Delta Force cannot afford unnecessary casualties. Their own soldiers are valuable, but the civilians are the mission's primary responsibility. Every decision will therefore be measured against the possibility of saving lives. The tension increases when authorities receive information suggesting that the terrorists may be willing to escalate their threats. This creates a sense of urgency. If the terrorists believe that their demands are being ignored, they may attempt to demonstrate their power through violence. The government cannot allow that to happen, but it also cannot rush blindly into a rescue. The Delta Force is caught between these two dangers. McCoy understands that there may never be a perfect moment. Eventually, he may have to act when the situation is still dangerous, simply because waiting could be even worse. This is the nature of special operations. Soldiers often have to choose between bad options rather than good ones. The goal is to select the option that gives innocent people the greatest chance of survival. As the mission develops, McCoy's relationship with his fellow soldiers becomes more important. The Delta Force is not simply a group of individuals, it is a team. They rely on one another for information, protection, and support. Each soldier knows that the person beside him may literally determine whether he lives or dies. This creates a powerful bond. They may have different personalities, but during an operation, they function as one unit. McCoy's leadership keeps that unity intact. He does not need to shout constantly or demonstrate his authority. His confidence and experience are enough. The men trust him because he has earned their respect. Colonel Alexander also trusts McCoy because he knows that the major can make difficult decisions in the field. Their professional relationship becomes one of the strongest elements of the story. Alexander provides strategic direction, while McCoy translates that strategy into action. The terrorists, meanwhile, remain unaware of how close the military response is becoming. Their confidence continues growing because they believe the governments involved are too afraid to attack. This creates dramatic irony. The audience knows that elite soldiers are preparing, while the terrorists believe they have complete control. That false confidence will eventually become one of their greatest weaknesses. McCoy knows that surprise is the Delta Force's strongest advantage, and he intends to preserve it for as long as possible. The soldiers therefore avoid unnecessary movements and maintain operational secrecy. They do not want the terrorists to know where they are or what they are planning. Every piece of information is carefully controlled. The military understands that even a small leak could compromise the mission. This is why intelligence and communication are treated so seriously. A hostage rescue can fail before the first shot is fired if the enemy learns the plan. McCoy's team is therefore prepared to change the operation at any moment. They understand that flexibility is essential. As the passengers continue waiting, some begin wondering whether anyone is coming to rescue them. They cannot see the military preparations, so the absence of visible action may make them feel abandoned. The terrorists encourage that feeling, telling the hostages that governments are unwilling or unable to help them. This psychological manipulation is intended to weaken hope. But the audience knows the truth. The Delta Force is coming. The soldiers are preparing to risk their lives for people who may never know their names. That contrast creates a powerful emotional tension. The passengers are trapped in darkness, while outside, an elite unit is preparing to move. The moment of confrontation is getting closer. McCoy receives more information about the terrorist location and begins refining the operation. He considers how the team can approach without alerting the enemy, where the hostages might be positioned, and how quickly the terrorists could react. He also considers what will happen if the situation goes wrong. Every possible failure must have a response. If one route is blocked, another must be available. If a terrorist escapes, someone must pursue him. If a hostage is injured, medical support must be ready. If communications fail, the soldiers must still understand the plan. This level of preparation demonstrates the professionalism of the Delta Force. Their confidence comes not from believing they are invincible, but from knowing they have prepared for as many possibilities as possible. Yet, no amount of preparation can eliminate risk. McCoy knows that some soldiers may not return. He also knows that the terrorists may try to use civilians as shields. The emotional weight of this responsibility is visible in the way he approaches the mission. He is determined but not careless. He understands the cost of failure. As the situation moves closer to direct confrontation, the movie begins shifting into the action-oriented style that audiences expect from a Chuck Norris military thriller. The calm preparation is gradually replaced by anticipation. Weapons are loaded, vehicles are positioned. Soldiers move into operational areas. Communications become shorter and more focused. The atmosphere among the Delta Force operators changes. They are no longer waiting casually. They are preparing to move. McCoy gives final instructions, reminding the men that discipline must remain the priority. Once the operation begins, everything will happen quickly. The terrorists may fire first. Civilians may panic. Smoke, noise, and confusion may make identification difficult. The soldiers must rely on their training and each other. This is where the years of preparation become meaningful. A Delta Force operator cannot stop to think about every movement. Training must become instinct. The team must move together. The terrorists may believe that they control the situation because they have weapons and hostages. But the Delta Force has something else: coordination. That coordination can turn a small team into a powerful force. The crisis finally reaches the stage where a direct military response becomes unavoidable. The order that McCoy has been waiting for is closer than ever. He knows that once the order comes, there will be no turning back. His team will move into danger, and the outcome will depend on their ability to execute the plan under extreme pressure. Colonel Alexander understands the same thing. He has to trust McCoy and the soldiers because there is no way for him to personally control what happens once they enter the operation. The chain of command reaches its most important point. The commander gives the order and the field leader takes responsibility. The Delta Force is now poised to move. The terrorists remain focused on their demands, unaware that an elite military unit is preparing to challenge them. The hostages continue waiting, hoping that someone will come. McCoy looks toward the operation ahead and understands that the time for preparation is almost over. The mission he has trained for is finally becoming real. He knows there will be gunfire, confusion, and danger, but he also knows that standing still will not save the passengers. The Delta Force must act. As the soldiers prepare to move, the story reaches a crucial turning point. The hostage crisis is no longer simply a political problem. It has become a military operation. Major Scott McCoy is about to lead his team into the heart of the danger, and the terrorists are about to discover that the passengers they thought gave them absolute power have also created the very reason an elite American force has been sent after them. The next stage will take McCoy and his men from preparation into direct confrontation, where speed, accuracy, courage, and sacrifice will determine whether the hostages survive. The Delta Force has waited long enough. The mission is beginning. The moment the Delta Force moves from preparation into action, the entire nature of the hostage crisis changes, because until now, the terrorists have controlled the situation through fear, uncertainty, and the knowledge that innocent passengers are standing between them and any military response. But Major Scott McCoy and Colonel Nick Alexander have been preparing for exactly this kind of moment. And when the order finally comes, the soldiers understand that there will be no room for hesitation. McCoy gathers his men and makes sure everyone understands the objective. The hostages come first, the terrorists must be neutralized, and the operation must be completed as quickly and cleanly as possible. The soldiers check their weapons one final time, secure their equipment, and prepare to move. Their expressions are serious because they know that training is about to become reality. For years, they have practiced entering dangerous environments, moving through confined spaces, responding to gunfire, and protecting civilians. But practice can never completely reproduce the uncertainty of a real hostage situation. McCoy knows that the terrorists are armed and desperate, and desperation can make an enemy unpredictable. He therefore reminds his men to remain disciplined and to trust the plan. But he also knows that the plan may change the moment they encounter resistance. The Delta Force moves toward the operation with speed and determination, and the soldiers immediately demonstrate why they are considered an elite unit. Their movements are coordinated, their communication is controlled, and every operator knows his responsibility. They are not charging blindly into danger, they are moving with a clear purpose. The contrast between the soldiers and the terrorists becomes obvious. The terrorists rely on intimidation and chaos, while the Delta Force relies on training and teamwork. The terrorists believe that the hostages make them untouchable, but McCoy understands that the same hostages create a predictable limitation. The terrorists cannot simply run or fight without considering the people they are holding. That gives the Delta Force opportunities. As the soldiers approach the area where the hostages are being held, tension rises because any unexpected movement could alert the terrorists. McCoy carefully evaluates the surroundings and searches for signs that the enemy has detected them. The soldiers remain ready for immediate action, but they do not rush unnecessarily. Their advantage depends on surprise, and surprise can disappear in an instant. Inside the hostage area, the passengers remain frightened and confused. Some hear movement and do not know whether it means rescue or another threat. The terrorists continue maintaining control, believing that the situation remains in their favor. They have no idea how close the Delta Force has come. This dramatic contrast creates one of the film's most suspenseful moments. The soldiers are moving closer while the hostages remain unaware of what is happening outside. McCoy knows that if the terrorists realize an assault is underway, they may react by killing hostages. Therefore, every movement must be calculated. The Delta Force's first objective is to create confusion among the terrorists, before the terrorists can create confusion among the soldiers. This is where speed becomes essential. If the operators can strike quickly, they can prevent the enemy from organizing a coordinated defense. The first confrontation erupts suddenly, transforming the tense operation into a violent firefight. Gunshots break the silence, soldiers move into position, and the terrorists react with surprise. For a few moments, the situation becomes chaotic. The terrorists fire back, attempting to defend themselves and maintain control of the hostages, but the Delta Force operators have trained for this exact environment. They move with precision, covering one another and eliminating threats as quickly as possible. McCoy leads from the front, making rapid decisions while keeping his attention on the civilians. He understands that defeating the terrorists is only half the mission. The hostages must survive. The soldiers therefore avoid reckless fire and constantly consider where civilians are located. The terrorists, on the other hand, are willing to use the hostages as protection. They attempt to move among the passengers, making it difficult for the soldiers to distinguish between immediate threats and innocent civilians. This forces McCoy to make split-second decisions. One wrong shot could kill a hostage. One moment of hesitation could allow a terrorist to escape. The Delta Force must find the narrow path between those two dangers. The firefight becomes increasingly intense, but the soldiers maintain their discipline. Their training allows them to continue functioning even when the environment becomes chaotic. They communicate quickly, move through the area, and protect one another from different angles. McCoy's leadership keeps the team focused. He does not allow the action to become uncontrolled. Every soldier understands the mission objective. The terrorists begin losing their advantage as the Delta Force gains control of key areas. The hostages start realizing that the people moving around them are not terrorists but soldiers. For some, this is the first moment of genuine hope since the crisis began. They may not understand exactly what is happening, but the presence of trained American soldiers tells them that help has arrived. Some passengers remain frozen with fear, while others begin following instructions from the Delta Force operators. The soldiers direct civilians away from the fighting and towards safer areas. Their ability to control the crowd is essential because panic can create additional casualties. McCoy knows that frightened civilians may run unpredictably, so the operators use clear commands to guide them. The operation begins transforming from an assault into a rescue. The terrorists who remain try to regroup, but the Delta Force continues pressing forward. Their superior coordination allows them to isolate individual threats rather than allowing the terrorists to combine their strength. The movie emphasizes the difference between organized military tactics and the terrorists' reliance on intimidation. The terrorists may be motivated and dangerous, but they are not prepared for a professional counterterrorism team moving with precision. McCoy and his men advance through the area, securing one section at a time. Every room and corridor must be checked because a single hidden terrorist could still threaten the hostages. The soldiers know that the most dangerous moments may come after the main firefight, when people assume the threat has ended. A terrorist hiding behind a door or among civilians could create a final burst of violence. McCoy therefore refuses to relax until the entire area is secure. This cautious approach saves lives. The hostages begin being moved away from danger, and the Delta Force operators organize them into groups. Medical personnel are prepared to assist anyone who has been injured or traumatized. The soldiers remain alert while the civilians are evacuated. McCoy continues searching for the remaining terrorists. His focus is intense because he understands that the mission is not finished. One surviving enemy can still turn a successful rescue into a disaster. The terrorists also realize that their position is collapsing. Some attempt to escape while others choose to fight. McCoy and his men pursue them, using their knowledge of the environment to prevent them from reaching the hostages. The action becomes a combination of close quarters combat, pursuit, and tactical movement. The Delta Force operators demonstrate their ability to adapt as the situation changes. They are no longer following a carefully controlled plan. They are responding to events as they happen. This is where their training becomes most valuable. McCoy makes decisions quickly, directing his men toward emerging threats and preventing the terrorists from regrouping. The operation also reveals the emotional side of the soldiers. These men are trained to fight, but they are not emotionless machines. They understand that innocent people have been traumatized. Some passengers are injured, others are terrified, and many are struggling to process what has happened. The soldiers attempt to reassure them while continuing their mission. This balance between violence and compassion is central to the Delta Force's identity. They fight with extreme force against the terrorists, but their purpose is ultimately humanitarian, to save lives. As the rescue continues, the terrorists begin realizing that their control over the hostages is disappearing. Their greatest weapon has been neutralized. The passengers are no longer helpless because trained soldiers are standing between them and the enemy. The terrorists become increasingly desperate. Desperation makes them dangerous, and McCoy knows that the final moments could be the most unpredictable. He orders his men to remain alert and continue clearing the area. The soldiers move carefully, checking every possible hiding place. Their communication remains controlled despite the noise and confusion. McCoy continues leading from the front, demonstrating the confidence that made him the natural choice for the mission. He knows that his men are watching him, and his calmness helps them remain focused. Meanwhile, Colonel Alexander monitors the operation from the command level. He receives updates about the progress of the rescue and understands that the situation is finally shifting in America's favor. But he also knows that the mission is not complete until every hostage is safe and every terrorist threat has been eliminated. The commander therefore remains cautious. He does not celebrate early. He understands that military operations can change in seconds. A single unexpected development can undo everything. The Delta Force continues moving through the operation area, and the soldiers eventually gain control of the critical sections. The hostages are evacuated, and the immediate danger begins to decrease. But the terrorists' actions have created a larger problem. The hijacking has demonstrated how vulnerable civilians can be when political extremists decide to use them as weapons. The rescue may save lives, but the threat of terrorism remains. McCoy understands that stopping one group does not end the larger conflict. The soldiers have completed their immediate mission, but the story is far from finished. The terrorists who remain may still attempt to escape or regroup, and the international crisis created by the hijacking continues beyond the rescue itself. The movie therefore begins moving toward a larger confrontation. McCoy has proven that the Delta Force can respond when the situation becomes critical, but the enemy has not necessarily been defeated completely. The soldiers must remain ready for the next stage. One of the most important aspects of this section is the transformation of the passengers from helpless hostages into survivors. Throughout the crisis, they have been controlled by fear. Now they are being led towards safety. Some cry with relief, some embrace one another, and others simply stand in shock. The emotional release demonstrates how deeply the ordeal has affected them. The soldiers see these reactions and understand why their mission mattered. For McCoy, the sight of civilians being reunited with safety is more important than any military victory. He does not need recognition. He simply wants the people to survive. This attitude separates him from the terrorists. The terrorists use human lives to achieve political goals. McCoy risks his own life to protect human lives. The difference is enormous. Yet, even as the immediate rescue succeeds, McCoy remains focused on the remaining threat. He knows that some terrorists may still be free, and he suspects that the crisis may not be over. The operation has revealed the determination of the enemy, and McCoy understands that they may attempt another move. The soldiers therefore prepare for continued action. They secure the area, gather intelligence, and begin identifying what happened during the hijacking. Every piece of information could be useful in preventing future attacks. McCoy's role shifts slightly from direct combat leader to investigator and strategist. He wants to understand what the terrorists planned and whether they have additional objectives. The Delta Force may have rescued hostages, but the enemy's broader plan may still be active. This possibility creates a new layer of tension. The terrorists may have anticipated military intervention and could have planned for it. If so, the rescue may be only one part of a much larger operation. McCoy refuses to assume victory until he knows exactly what the enemy is doing. This caution proves important because the story is about to move beyond the initial hostage crisis. The terrorists' political goals remain unresolved, and the passengers may still be in danger even after the immediate rescue. The Delta Force soldiers are therefore forced to consider what happens next. They cannot simply leave the moment the hostages are out of danger. They must determine whether the terrorist organization still poses a threat and whether the rescued passengers could become targets again. McCoy understands that terrorism does not end when the gunfire stops. The ideological conflict remains, and the people responsible may attempt another attack. This realization keeps the soldiers focused. Meanwhile, the authorities begin assessing the outcome of the operation. The successful intervention demonstrates the effectiveness of the Delta Force, but it also highlights the enormous risks involved. The military has proven that it can respond to a hostage crisis, yet every operation depends on intelligence, timing, and luck. McCoy knows that future missions may be even more difficult. The terrorists will learn from what happened, and the next time they may be better prepared. This idea creates a sense of realism within the action story. Victory does not mean the enemy has disappeared. It simply means the current battle has been won. As the situation settles temporarily, McCoy reflects on the mission. He has seen fear, violence, and courage in the same place. He has watched civilians endure an experience that will likely affect them for the rest of their lives. He has also seen his soldiers put themselves in danger without hesitation. For McCoy, this reinforces the meaning of military service. Soldiers are often asked to enter situations that ordinary people cannot escape, and their job is to create a path to safety. The Delta Force is not defined only by its weapons or tactics. It is defined by its willingness to accept danger on behalf of others. This idea becomes increasingly important as the movie moves toward its later stages. The terrorists may believe that violence gives them power, but McCoy believes that courage can take that power away. The hostage rescue has shown that. The terrorists controlled the passengers when nobody could challenge them. Once the Delta Force arrived, their power began collapsing. This is the central military fantasy of the film. Highly trained soldiers can enter seemingly impossible situations and restore control. But the movie also understands that such missions come with costs. Not every operation can end perfectly. Soldiers may be injured or killed. Hostages may suffer trauma, and political consequences may continue long after the rescue. McCoy carries this responsibility with him. He does not treat the mission like a game. Every casualty matters. Every life saved matters. As the story prepares to move into its next phase, the terrorists are no longer simply holding passengers. They are now facing a military force that has demonstrated its ability to reach them. The balance of power has changed. McCoy and Alexander know that the enemy may respond with greater violence. The Delta Force therefore remains prepared. Their mission may expand beyond rescue into pursuit. If the terrorists have additional plans, the soldiers may have to stop them before they can execute those plans. This possibility hangs over the operation as the immediate crisis begins to fade. The soldiers may have won the first major confrontation, but the larger war against terrorism continues. McCoy looks at his men and knows that their work is not finished. They have shown what they can do under pressure, but now they may have to take the fight directly to the people responsible. The next phase will demand even more from them. Instead of simply responding to an attack, they may have to pursue the enemy across dangerous territory and prevent the terrorists from escaping. The Delta Force has moved from preparation to action, and now it is moving toward retaliation and pursuit. The terrorists wanted to prove that they could control governments through fear, but they have discovered that fear does not stop everyone. Major Scott McCoy has faced them directly, and his soldiers have demonstrated that even in a hostage situation filled with uncertainty, disciplined teamwork can overcome chaos. Yet, the story is not finished. The terrorists may still have plans, the political situation remains unstable, and McCoy knows that another confrontation is likely. The rescue has saved lives, but it has also revealed the depth of the threat. The Delta Force now has to decide how far it is willing to go to make sure the terrorists cannot strike again. As McCoy prepares for what comes next, one thing has become clear. The mission is no longer simply about rescuing hostages. It is about stopping the people who created the crisis in the first place. And if those terrorists believe they can escape after everything they have done, they are about to discover that Major Scott McCoy is not finished hunting them. The successful rescue has changed the balance of power, but for Major Scott McCoy, the mission is far from over. Because while many of the hostages have finally been brought closer to safety, the terrorists responsible for the crisis remain a threat. And McCoy understands that allowing them to escape could mean another attack somewhere else, another aircraft, another group of innocent passengers, and another family waiting desperately for someone to come home. The Delta Force has already demonstrated its ability to respond to the immediate danger, but now the soldiers must deal with the consequences of the operation and determine what the terrorists intend to do next. McCoy is exhausted, but his focus remains sharp. He knows that the men he leads are also tired, yet their training has taught them how to continue functioning under pressure. The successful rescue has given them confidence, but McCoy refuses to become careless. In his experience, the most dangerous moment of any operation can come immediately after people believe the danger has passed. An enemy that feels cornered may become unpredictable, and terrorists who have already demonstrated their willingness to threaten civilians may be capable of taking even greater risks when they realize their plans are collapsing. The soldiers therefore remain alert, gathering information and trying to understand the next move. The larger political situation also becomes more complicated. The terrorists are not simply criminals who can be arrested and forgotten. Their actions are connected to political demands and ideological objectives, meaning that the crisis has consequences far beyond the immediate hostage situation. Governments are forced to consider how to respond without creating an even larger conflict, while military commanders understand that hesitation could give the terrorists another opportunity. McCoy is not interested in political arguments. His concern is practical. Find the enemy, stop them, and protect innocent people. This straightforward attitude becomes increasingly important as the mission moves into its next phase. The Delta Force soldiers are no longer waiting for an attack. They are preparing to take the fight to the terrorists. McCoy studies the available intelligence and begins identifying where the enemy may be vulnerable. The terrorists have shown that they are willing to move, hide, and use civilians as protection, but they have also revealed patterns in their behavior. McCoy knows that if he can predict their next destination, he may be able to intercept them. The military begins coordinating information from different sources, and the Delta Force prepares for a mission that may take them far from the original hostage situation. This creates a new challenge because the soldiers are trained for special operations, but every environment presents different risks. They may have to move through unfamiliar territory, operate without the same level of support, and make decisions with incomplete intelligence. McCoy understands that the mission could become more dangerous than the initial rescue because the terrorists now know that an elite military unit is coming after them. The element of surprise may be reduced, and the enemy may be prepared to resist. Yet, McCoy also knows that allowing the terrorists to escape would be unacceptable. The soldiers therefore prepare their equipment and wait for the final intelligence that will confirm their target. Meanwhile, the rescued passengers are beginning the long process of returning to normal life. Some are reunited with family members, while others are treated for injuries and emotional trauma. Their ordeal has changed them permanently. They have learned how quickly ordinary life can disappear and how vulnerable civilians can become when violence enters a confined environment. The Delta Force soldiers see these survivors and are reminded why they fight. For McCoy, the faces of the passengers are more meaningful than any medal or military recognition. The operation was successful because people survived. That is the standard by which he judges himself. Yet the existence of survivors also means the story has consequences beyond the battlefield. The terrorist actions have created fear across the public, and governments now have to demonstrate that such attacks will not go unanswered. The Delta Force therefore becomes a symbol of America's determination to respond. But McCoy knows that symbols do not stop terrorists. Soldiers do, intelligence does, preparation does, and sometimes difficult action is necessary. As information begins confirming the terrorist movements, McCoy and Alexander receive the details they have been waiting for. The enemy is still active, and there is a possibility that they are attempting to escape with remaining hostages or pursue another objective. The Delta Force is ordered to prepare for another operation. This time, the soldiers know exactly what kind of enemy they are facing. They have already experienced the terrorist tactics, and they understand how quickly the situation can become chaotic. McCoy therefore approaches the new mission with even greater caution. He wants his men to be prepared for ambushes, hidden weapons, and unexpected resistance. He also understands that the terrorists may be more desperate than before. Desperation can make an enemy dangerous because people who believe they have nothing left to lose may take extreme actions. The soldiers prepare themselves mentally for that possibility. Their mission briefing is focused and serious. Maps are studied, routes are examined, and possible objectives are identified. McCoy does not allow unnecessary conversation to distract from the task. He wants every soldier to understand what is expected. The Delta Force may be small compared with a conventional army, but its strength comes from the quality of its personnel and the coordination between them. Every operator knows how to support another. Every soldier understands that his actions can affect the entire team. This trust becomes essential as they move toward the next confrontation. The operation begins with the Delta Force moving toward the enemy's position. The soldiers travel with the awareness that the terrorists may be watching them. They cannot assume they are hidden simply because they are moving carefully. Their equipment and tactics give them advantages, but the enemy has experience as well. McCoy therefore keeps the team flexible. If the situation changes, they must adapt immediately. This ability to adapt is one of the main differences between elite special forces and ordinary military units. A conventional force may depend heavily on a detailed plan, but a small special operations team must often make decisions without waiting for new instructions. McCoy understands that reality and prepares his men to think independently while remaining connected as a team. As the Delta Force approaches the operational area, the atmosphere becomes tense again. The soldiers know that another firefight may be moments away. McCoy checks the surroundings and looks for signs of enemy activity. The area appears quiet, but he knows that silence can be deceptive. Terrorists can hide among civilians, inside buildings, or near vehicles. The soldiers move carefully, using cover and maintaining awareness of possible threats. The first signs of resistance appear suddenly. The enemy begins firing, forcing the Delta Force to react immediately. The soldiers return fire and move into defensive positions. McCoy directs the team through the chaos, ensuring that no one becomes isolated. The terrorists attempt to use the environment to their advantage, but the Delta Force's training allows the soldiers to maintain control. The firefight becomes intense, with both sides attempting to gain a tactical advantage. McCoy knows that the terrorists may be trying to create a distraction while another group escapes. He therefore refuses to focus only on the immediate gunfight. He thinks about the larger situation. Where are the hostages? Where are the terrorist leaders? Where could they retreat? What is the escape route? These questions guide his decisions. A soldier who focuses only on the enemy directly in front of him may miss the bigger threat. McCoy does not make that mistake. He directs some men to contain the immediate attackers while others search for movement elsewhere. This division of responsibilities demonstrates the professionalism of the unit. The terrorists begin losing ground. Their weapons may be powerful, but their organization is weaker than that of the Delta Force. They rely on aggression, while the soldiers rely on coordination. The Delta Force advances methodically, securing one position after another. McCoy continues moving with the team, refusing to stay behind while his men face danger. His presence on the front line strengthens their confidence. They know that their commander is willing to take the same risks he asks them to take. As the firefight continues, the soldiers encounter additional resistance. Some terrorists attempt to escape, forcing McCoy to make a quick decision. Pursuing them may allow other enemies to regroup, but allowing them to escape could create a future threat. McCoy orders part of the team to continue securing the area while another group follows the escaping terrorists. This decision demonstrates his ability to balance immediate and long-term objectives. The Delta Force cannot simply chase every enemy. It must control the battlefield. Once the main threat is contained, the soldiers can pursue those attempting to flee. The terrorists realize that escape may be impossible. Some continue fighting, while others attempt to disappear into the surrounding environment. McCoy's team refuses to let them regroup. The operation becomes a relentless pursuit. The soldiers move quickly but carefully, maintaining communication and supporting one another. Their objective is not revenge. It is to prevent the terrorists from causing another attack. This distinction matters to McCoy. He does not want his men to become consumed by anger. Anger can lead to mistakes. The Delta Force must remain professional even when facing an enemy responsible for the suffering of innocent people. McCoy's ability to control his emotions becomes one of his greatest strengths. He has personal reasons to hate the terrorists, but he does not allow hatred to determine his tactics. The pursuit eventually leads the soldiers toward another dangerous confrontation. The terrorists attempt to establish a defensive position, using buildings and vehicles as cover. McCoy recognizes the tactic and begins looking for a way around it. He knows that a direct assault could expose his men to unnecessary danger. Instead, he searches for weaknesses in the enemy's position. This is where the intelligence gathered earlier becomes valuable. McCoy understands how the terrorists think and what they are likely to protect. He uses that knowledge to anticipate their movements. The soldiers reposition themselves, creating pressure from multiple directions. The terrorists begin realizing that they are surrounded. Their confidence disappears, replaced by desperation. They attempt to break through the Delta Force's lines, but the soldiers are ready. The confrontation becomes another test of discipline. McCoy orders his men to remain focused and avoid unnecessary casualties. The objective is to end the threat, not create chaos. The soldiers follow his instructions and the terrorist position begins collapsing. The action demonstrates the effectiveness of the Delta Force training. These soldiers are not simply stronger or better armed, they are more organized. They communicate, adapt, and support one another. The terrorists may have the advantage of surprise, but the Delta Force has the advantage of preparation and discipline. As the fighting moves toward its conclusion, McCoy searches for the remaining terrorist leaders. He knows that eliminating individual fighters may not end the organization. Leaders can rebuild, recruit, and plan new attacks. The real objective is therefore to disrupt the command structure. McCoy's pursuit becomes more personal when he realizes that some of the people responsible for the hostage crisis may still be trying to escape. He refuses to allow them to disappear. The soldiers follow the trail and continue the pursuit. Meanwhile, Colonel Alexander remains in contact with the operation and coordinates additional support. He trusts McCoy to make tactical decisions, but remains ready to intervene if the situation changes. Their communication demonstrates the importance of command during special operations. McCoy may be on the ground, but he is never completely alone. The larger military structure supports him. This allows the Delta Force to operate with both independence and strategic backing. The pursuit eventually reaches a point where McCoy must make a difficult decision. The enemy may have an opportunity to escape, but stopping them could require taking significant risks. McCoy weighs the danger carefully. He understands that the soldiers' lives matter, but he also understands the consequences of allowing terrorists to escape. He decides that the risk is necessary. The Delta Force continues forward. The soldiers move with determination, knowing that the next confrontation could decide whether the terrorists escape or face justice. The chase becomes increasingly intense as the enemy attempts to use vehicles and unfamiliar terrain to create distance. McCoy and his men respond with speed and tactical skill. The military vehicles become an important part of the operation, allowing the soldiers to pursue the terrorists and maintain pressure. The action becomes larger and more explosive, moving beyond the confined environment of the original hostage crisis into an open pursuit. This transition gives the film a broader action scale. What began as a hijacking has now become a military pursuit across dangerous territory. McCoy remains focused on the objective. He knows that the terrorists may be desperate enough to sacrifice themselves if they believe they can take others with them. Therefore, the soldiers must prevent them from reaching populated areas or gaining access to additional hostages. The chase becomes a race against time. Every mile the terrorists travel creates another opportunity for them to escape. McCoy pushes his team forward, using every available advantage. The Delta Force vehicles move quickly, and the soldiers maintain communication as they pursue their targets. The terrorists attempt evasive maneuvers, but the military team's experience allows them to anticipate many of these moves. The pursuit becomes a demonstration of determination on both sides. The terrorists refuse to surrender because they believe escape is their only chance. The Delta Force refuses to stop because they believe allowing the terrorists to escape would put future lives at risk. Eventually, the two sides are forced into another direct confrontation. The terrorists realize that they cannot outrun the military indefinitely. They turn toward fighting again, and McCoy prepares his men for the final engagement. The soldiers take positions, assess the enemy, and prepare to move. The tension is different from the earlier hostage rescue. This time, the Delta Force is not trying to enter a confined aircraft filled with civilians. They are pursuing armed terrorists who know they are being hunted. The rules are different, but the danger remains. McCoy gives the order, and the soldiers move. The firefight erupts once again. Explosions and gunfire fill the area as the Delta Force attacks the terrorist position. The soldiers use vehicles and terrain for cover, moving forward while returning fire. McCoy remains at the center of the action, directing his men and pursuing the terrorist leaders. The enemy fights desperately, but their position becomes increasingly difficult to defend. The Delta Force's superior coordination begins overwhelming them. One by one, the terrorists lose their ability to resist. Yet McCoy knows that the mission will not be complete until the final threat is neutralized. He continues forward, refusing to stop. The emotional weight of the mission becomes clear in these moments. The soldiers are not fighting for glory. They are fighting because they believe the terrorists must be stopped before they can harm more innocent people. McCoy's determination is driven by responsibility rather than personal hatred. This is why he remains focused even when the fighting becomes chaotic. He does not lose control. He does not allow the mission to become revenge. He remains a soldier. As the final resistance begins collapsing, the Delta Force gains control of the area. The terrorists are defeated or forced to flee, and the immediate threat begins disappearing. McCoy surveys the scene, looking for signs that anyone else remains in danger. His first instinct is still to protect people. Even after the fighting, he does not simply walk away. He checks the area, ensures his men are accounted for, and confirms that the objective has been achieved. Colonel Alexander receives the report and understands that the mission has succeeded. The Delta Force has once again demonstrated its ability to operate under extreme pressure. But for McCoy, victory is not measured by the number of enemies defeated. It is measured by the number of innocent people who survived. The soldiers may return with injuries, exhaustion, and memories they will carry for years, but they have done what they were sent to do. They confronted a terrorist threat and prevented it from becoming even worse. As the operation finally begins to wind down, McCoy reflects on the events that brought the soldiers there. The crisis began with ordinary passengers simply trying to travel, and it transformed into a situation involving terrorism, international politics, military intervention, and deadly combat. The passengers will return to their families, but the soldiers will carry the experience with them. They understand that another mission will eventually come. Terrorism cannot be defeated permanently through a single operation. New threats will appear, and new soldiers will have to respond. The Delta Force exists because there will always be situations where someone must step forward. McCoy accepts that reality. He knows that his job is not finished simply because this mission has ended. As the soldiers prepare to leave, there is a quiet sense of relief among them. They survived. They completed the mission. But they also understand the cost of what happened. The operation has shown them how quickly ordinary life can turn into chaos, and how much courage is required to restore order. McCoy looks at his men with the understanding that their strength comes from one another. Without teamwork, none of this would have been possible. Without discipline, the rescue could have become a disaster. Without courage, the soldiers might never have entered the danger zone. The Delta Force's greatest weapon was not simply firepower. It was the willingness to act when everyone else was afraid to act. Yet the story still has another important stage ahead. The terrorists may have been defeated in this confrontation, but the broader consequences of the crisis remain. Governments must respond to the political fallout. Families must recover from the trauma, and the military must examine what happened. For McCoy, the experience reinforces an uncomfortable truth. The world is dangerous, and sometimes protecting innocent people requires soldiers to enter that danger willingly. He does not celebrate the violence, he simply accepts the responsibility. The Delta Force has shown that even when terrorists believe they can control governments through fear, highly trained soldiers can challenge that power. The hostages are no longer helpless. The terrorists are no longer in control. The military has taken the initiative. But the final part of McCoy's journey will bring the story toward its emotional conclusion, where the cost of the mission, the loyalty between soldiers, and the meaning of duty will become even clearer. The Delta Force has fought through the immediate crisis, pursued the enemy, and demonstrated its strength. But the real legacy of the mission will not be measured by explosions or gunfire. It will be measured by the lives saved, the courage displayed, and the willingness of ordinary soldiers to put themselves in danger for strangers. Major Scott McCoy knows that there will always be another threat waiting somewhere in the world. But for now, the people who were trapped have a chance to return home. And that, more than anything else, is why the Delta Force exists. The final stage of the mission brings the story toward its emotional conclusion as Major Scott McCoy and the soldiers of the Delta Force face the consequences of everything that has happened. Because the hostage crisis was never simply a battle between soldiers and terrorists. It was a test of courage, discipline, leadership, sacrifice, and the willingness of ordinary people to survive when their lives are suddenly placed in the hands of others. And after everything McCoy and his team have endured, the mission has become about more than defeating an enemy. It has become about making sure the people they came to protect actually have a chance to return home and rebuild their lives, while the soldiers themselves must carry the memories of those who were not so fortunate and understand that their work is never truly finished. When the final confrontation begins, the atmosphere is completely different from the early moments of the story. At the beginning, the terrorists possess the advantage because they control the aircraft and the passengers. But now that advantage has almost disappeared. The Delta Force has taken control of the situation through preparation, teamwork, and relentless determination. Major McCoy remains at the center of the operation, directing his men while continuing to push toward the final objective. He knows that the enemy may be cornered, but cornered enemies can be extremely dangerous. The remaining terrorists have every reason to fight because surrender could mean capture, punishment, or the destruction of everything they believed in. McCoy therefore refuses to underestimate them. His soldiers move carefully, keeping their weapons ready and maintaining communication as they advance. Every operator knows that even though the mission is close to completion, a single mistake could still cost lives. The Delta Force has spent the entire operation trying to protect civilians, and that responsibility remains their priority until the very last moment. The terrorists attempt to resist, but the military force has become too strong for them to control. Their organization begins collapsing under pressure. What once looked like a carefully planned terrorist operation has been reduced to scattered resistance from individuals trying to survive. McCoy understands that the enemy's psychological advantage has disappeared. Fear once belonged to the terrorists, but now the terrorists are the ones being hunted. This reversal is one of the most important developments in the story. The people who believe they could control everyone through violence discover that violence does not guarantee victory. The Delta Force has entered their world, challenged their authority, and forced them into a defensive position. McCoy does not allow his men to become distracted by the satisfaction of winning. He keeps reminding them through his actions that the mission is not complete until everyone is safe. The soldiers continue searching the area, checking possible hiding places, and making sure no terrorist can suddenly attack the hostages or escape with additional victims. Meanwhile, the rescued passengers begin realizing that their nightmare is finally ending. Some are physically injured, while others are emotionally overwhelmed. Many have spent hours or days under the constant fear of death, and now they are suddenly surrounded by soldiers telling them that they are safe. For some passengers, it may take time before they can fully believe it. They have been threatened so many times that the idea of freedom almost feels unreal. The Delta Force operators guide them towards safety, helping them move away from the fighting. The soldiers remain calm because they understand that civilians need reassurance. A frightened passenger does not need a complicated military explanation. They need someone to tell them that the danger is over. This human interaction is one of the most meaningful aspects of the mission. The soldiers have spent much of the story surrounded by weapons, vehicles, explosions, and combat, but the ultimate purpose of all that action is represented by these ordinary people walking away alive. McCoy watches the evacuation and understands that the operation has achieved its primary objective. Yet, there is still unfinished business. The terrorists who organized the crisis must be dealt with, and the military needs to make sure they cannot simply disappear and prepare another attack. The final pursuit becomes a test of McCoy's determination. He has already pushed himself and his team through multiple dangerous situations, but he refuses to stop while the enemy remains capable of causing harm. The terrorists attempt to escape using whatever options are available. They may try to use vehicles, unfamiliar terrain, or the confusion created by the fighting to disappear. But McCoy anticipates these possibilities. He understands that desperate enemies often make predictable choices. They seek the fastest route away from danger, and that creates patterns the Delta Force can exploit. McCoy directs his men toward the escape routes and continues the pursuit. The action becomes fast and intense, but there is a clear sense that the soldiers are closing the distance. The terrorists may have believed they could use hostages and political pressure to force governments into submission, but now they are discovering that the military has taken away their ability to control the situation. Their plan has failed. Their confidence is gone. They are no longer dictating events, they are reacting to them. McCoy's team continues moving forward and the final confrontation becomes inevitable. The soldiers prepare for one last engagement, understanding that the enemy will probably fight desperately. McCoy gives instructions and positions his men carefully. The Delta Force surrounds the area and prepares to eliminate the remaining threat. The terrorists attempt to fight back, but their position is increasingly hopeless. The soldiers advance with controlled precision, using cover and coordinating their movements. McCoy remains focused on the objective. He does not allow personal anger to interfere with his decisions. This is important because the terrorists have caused enormous suffering, and it would be easy for the soldiers to act emotionally. Instead, McCoy maintains the discipline expected of an elite commander. His goal is not revenge. His goal is to make sure the terrorists cannot hurt anyone else. The firefight becomes the final major test of the Delta Force. Gunfire fills the area, vehicles move through dangerous positions, and explosions create confusion. Yet the soldiers continue operating as a team. One operator protects another, one advances while another covers him, and the group moves forward as a single coordinated force. Their ability to trust each other becomes the difference between survival and disaster. McCoy knows that every man in the team is depending on him, but he also knows that he is depending on every one of them. This mutual trust has been built through years of training and experience. It cannot be created during a crisis. It must already exist. That is why the Delta Force is so effective. They have prepared for this moment long before the terrorists ever knew they existed. As the confrontation continues, the remaining terrorists begin falling back. Some attempt to hide, others try to escape, and some continue fighting until they are overwhelmed. McCoy refuses to let them regroup. He understands that allowing even a small group to escape could create a future threat. The soldiers continue searching until they are confident that the area is secure. Finally, the last major resistance is broken. The immediate threat has ended. The silence that follows feels completely different from the silence before the operation. Earlier, silence meant uncertainty. Now it means the fighting has stopped. The soldiers begin checking on one another. They make sure everyone is accounted for and that injured personnel receive attention. There is no celebration in the traditional sense. Instead, there is relief. These men know how close they came to losing their lives. They also know that the mission could have ended very differently. McCoy looks at his soldiers and sees the exhaustion on their faces. They have spent an enormous amount of energy fighting, moving, protecting, and pursuing the enemy. Yet, they did not abandon the mission. Their commitment is what made the rescue possible. Colonel Alexander receives the final reports and understands that the operation has succeeded. From the command perspective, the objective has been achieved. The hostages have been rescued, the terrorist threat has been contained, and the Delta Force has demonstrated its ability to respond to a major crisis. But Alexander also understands the cost. Military victories often come with losses that cannot be measured simply by whether the mission succeeded. Soldiers may carry physical injuries and emotional scars long after the headlines disappear. The people who were rescued may also struggle with memories of what happened. The crisis is over, but its effects will remain. This is an important part of the story because it reminds the audience that action movies often end when the enemy is defeated, while real life continues afterward. Survivors have to rebuild, families have to heal, soldiers have to return to their normal routines even though they have experienced extraordinary violence. McCoy understands this better than anyone. He has seen the aftermath of conflict before, and he knows that victory does not erase trauma. For him, the most important thing is that the passengers are alive. He watches as civilians begin reuniting with loved ones, and the emotional significance of those reunions becomes clear. People who feared they would never see each other again are suddenly embracing. Parents hold their children, friends comfort one another, families cry with relief. These moments provide the emotional payoff for everything the Delta Force has done. The soldiers may never receive personal thanks from every passenger, but they know why they were there. They were there because someone had to come. Someone had to enter the danger. Someone had to stand between innocent people and terrorists. McCoy and his men accepted that responsibility. The film therefore presents military service as a form of sacrifice. The soldiers are trained to fight, but their real purpose is protection. They are willing to risk their own lives so that others can live. This idea is reflected in McCoy's character throughout the story. He is tough, experienced, and capable, but his strength is not simply physical. His greatest quality is responsibility. He understands